The crystalline throne room of the Kralzar royal spire glimmered with a cold, merciless light. Razor-sharp geometric patterns reflected the chamber's true nature, a place of absolute power and unforgiving judgment. Princess Lyra stood at the center, her iridescent scales dulled by fear, each trembling scale a testament to her perpetual disappointment. King Vornak loomed above her, a mountain of muscle and chitin, his multiple eyes burning with a contempt that had defined her entire existence. Around them, the royal court watched in silent anticipation. To the Kralzar, weakness was a death sentence, and Lyra had been weak from the moment of her birth. "Look at you." Vornak's voice rumbled like distant artillery, each word a weapon designed to cut deeper than any blade. 16 stellar cycles, and you have proven nothing. No combat achievements, no strategic brilliance, not even the basic aggression expected of a royal heir. Lyra kept her gaze lowered, a survival instinct beaten into her through years of ridicule and punishment. The other royal children, her siblings, had long since been celebrated as future military commanders. They were living weapons, each one a perfect embodiment of Kralzar martial supremacy. She was an aberration, a genetic mistake that should have been terminated at birth. But the Kralzar had other uses for genetic mistakes. "You will serve the Empire," Vornak proclaimed, his massive hand slamming against the crystalline control panel. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing star charts and diplomatic transmission logs. "Humans have been pushing into our peripheral territories. They are an unpredictable species, barely understood. You will be our tribute, our messenger." The implication was clear. Tribute often meant death. Or worse. Whispers rippled through the court. Royal observers clicked their mandibles in a mixture of derision and anticipation. Some hoped for her quick elimination. Others seemed curious about what fate awaited the weakest royal offspring. Lyra's hand, smaller and more delicate than those of her warrior siblings, unconsciously traced a genetic marker hidden beneath her scales. A mark so subtle, so deeply embedded that even the most advanced Kralzar medical scanners had never detected its potential. Something ancient and powerful slumbered within her DNA, waiting. "The human diplomatic vessel will arrive within 3 solar cycles," Vornak continued, his multiple eyes rotating independently, scanning the room for any hint of dissent. "You will carry our minimal communication protocols. Your mission is simple: establish initial contact and demonstrate the Kralzar's magnanimous nature." A diplomatic mission was a death sentence for most. Humans were an unknown quantity, a species that had somehow resisted initial Kralzar exploration attempts. They were chaotic, unpredictable, everything the rigid Kralzar society despised. As the royal guards approached to escort her away, Lyra caught a glimpse of her reflection in the chamber's crystalline walls, a small, unremarkable figure against the massive, militaristic backdrop of her people. Disposable. Forgettable. She did not know then that her journey would shatter everything the Kralzar believed about strength, about potential, about the very nature of evolution itself. The genetic marker beneath her scales pulsed, waiting. The human research vessel Horizon stretched like a living organism through the void of space, defying everything Lyra understood about military architecture. No sharp edges, no weapon-like protrusions. Instead, a fluid design that suggested adaptability, cooperation, movement. Her first glimpse of Commander Jack Harper obliterated every preconception about human leadership. He wasn't massive like a Kralzar commander. No visible weapons, no intimidating armor. Just a human with deep brown skin, intelligent eyes, and a posture that suggested coiled potential rather than immediate threat. Beside him stood Dr. Elena Rodriguez, her lab coat a stark contrast to military uniforms, her stance radiating a different kind of power. "Welcome aboard," Harper said, his translator rendering the words in perfect Kralzar dialect. "We've been expecting you." Expecting her. Lyra's genetic marker pulsed beneath her scales, an almost imperceptible vibration that she'd learned to hide. In Kralzar society, showing any unique reaction was a vulnerability. Here, something felt different. The initial processing was nothing like her training. No brutality. No immediate categorization into warrior classes. Instead, a series of tests that seemed almost playful. Adaptive challenges that changed moment to moment, requiring more than physical strength. Dr. Rodriguez approached with a holographic display. "Your genetic structure is fascinating," she murmured, not as a scientist examining a specimen, but with genuine curiosity. "There are adaptability markers here we've never seen before." The first test came unexpectedly. A virtual environment materialized around Lyra, a complex, shifting landscape that responded to her thoughts, her emotions. Unlike Kralzar training simulations that punished failure with pain, this environment transformed with her attempts. A chasm appeared. Her first instinct was Kralzar training. Find the most direct, violent path across. But the simulation responded differently. Bridges formed where she imagined connections. Pathways emerged from her curiosity rather than her aggression. "Interesting," Harper observed. "Most species see obstacles. You're seeing possibilities." Lyra didn't understand. In her world, an obstacle was something to be destroyed, not navigated. Yet here, destruction seemed the least efficient approach. The medical bay was another shock. No cold examination tables. Instead, a space that felt almost alive. Diagnostic tools that seemed to communicate rather than simply measure. Dr. Rodriguez moved with a fluidity that suggested the technology was an extension of her thinking, not just a tool. "Your physiology is remarkable," she explained. "The Kralzar genetic structure has extraordinary untapped potential. Most of your species training actually suppresses your natural capabilities." Suppressed. The word echoed in Lyra's mind like a revelation. The ship itself seemed to be watching, learning. Adaptive systems that responded to presence, to intention. Nothing like the rigid, hierarchical Kralzar vessels, where every system had a singular predetermined function. By the end of the first solar cycle, Lyra realized she was no longer a tribute. She was becoming something else entirely. A variable. An unknown quantity. And for the first time in her life, that didn't feel like a weakness. Her genetic marker continued to pulse. Awakening. Pain erupted through every cell of Lyra's body. Not the controlled, ritualistic pain of Kralzar training, but something more profound. A transformation that rewrote her fundamental understanding of herself. The training complex was unlike anything in the known galaxy. No rigid structures, no predetermined paths. Instead, an environment that shifted and breathed, challenging her in ways that defied her species' most basic combat doctrines. "Your body is lying to you," Commander Harper said during one particularly grueling session. His voice wasn't cruel. It was analytical, almost compassionate. "Your Kralzar physiology has been systematically limited. We're going to show you what you're actually capable of." Lyra's first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A neural interfacing test that was supposed to map her cognitive responses suddenly went haywire. Where Kralzar technology would have shut down, these human systems adapted. Quantum neural pathways she didn't know existed began to light up like star systems coming alive. Dr. Rodriguez's excitement was palpable. "The genetic marker," she whispered to Harper, "it's not just a marker. It's a dormant evolutionary trigger." The physical training was equally revolutionary. Instead of the brutal, repetitive Kralzar combat drills, humans approached her development holistically. One moment she'd be in advanced quantum tactical simulation, the next practicing intricate movement techniques that seemed more like art than warfare. "Strength isn't about how hard you can hit," Sergeant Maya Chen, a human combat specialist, told her. "It's about understanding the entire system of conflict." Lyra's first true test came during a multi-environmental survival scenario, a simulation that combined physical challenge, psychological pressure, and technological adaptation. The old Lyra would have approached it as a linear problem to be crushed. Now, she saw it as a living, breathing challenge. Her body began to change, not just in muscle definition, but in something more fundamental. The iridescent scales that once marked her as weak now shimmered with a different quality. Adaptive, responsive. Her neural pathways were rewriting themselves, creating connections that defied Kralzar's scientific understanding. During a critical moment in the simulation, something extraordinary happened. Lyra's genetic marker fully activated. Time seemed to slow. Her perception expanded beyond normal sensory input. She could see potential pathways, understand complex system interactions at a molecular level. The simulation wasn't just a test. It was a conversation, and she was learning its language. When the scenario ended, Commander Harper and Dr. Rodriguez exchanged a look of profound understanding. "She's not just adapting," Harper said quietly. "She's evolving." Lyra stood in the center of the training complex, her body vibrating with newfound potential. The scared, disposable princess was gone. Something else was emerging. A weapon, yes, but more than that. A living system of infinite potential. Her genetic marker pulsed one final time. No longer hidden. No longer dormant. Awakened. The Kralzar reconnaissance mission approached human space like a predator stalking wounded prey. Their massive biomechanical warship, the Sovereign Talon, bristled with weapons that had crushed a dozen civilizations. Its commander, Sub-Admiral Krasnak, carried generations of conquests in his genetic memory. He never saw Lyra coming. In the Horizon's Advanced Tactical Center, Commander Harper watched as Lyra transformed from trainee to weapon. Her eyes, once dull and defeated, now burned with a calculative intensity that defied her previous existence. "Target acquisition in 3 minutes," Lyra announced, her voice a perfect blend of human tactical training and Kralzar precision. Her neural interface hummed with possibilities, quantum algorithms dancing at the speed of thought. Dr. Rodriguez monitored the genetic marker's activity. What had begun as a dormant anomaly now pulsed like a living star, feeding Lyra with information beyond standard sensory input. She wasn't just predicting the Kralzar ship's movements. She was feeling them. The mission was elegance itself, a surgical strike designed not just to disable, but to send a message. "They'll expect aggression," Lyra explained to the human tactical team. "Kralzar doctrine is built on overwhelming force. We'll use their expectations against them." The first phase involved an electromagnetic manipulation so subtle it was practically invisible. Lyra's enhanced perception allowed her to identify microscopic vulnerabilities in the Sovereign Talon's communication networks. Quantum encrypted signals began to whisper, then scream, then collapse. Sub-Admiral Krasnak's first indication of trouble came when his primary communication arrays went dark. Redundant systems flickered, then died. "Impossible," he growled, his multiple eyes rotating in panic. Lyra's fingers danced across holographic interfaces. Each movement was a weapon, each thought a strategic algorithm. The Sovereign Talon wasn't just being attacked, it was being taken apart from the inside. Its own systems turned against it. A communication burst erupted across all Kralzar frequencies. Not a standard military transmission, but something far more dangerous. A message embedded with psychological warfare that would shake the foundations of their hierarchical society. To the Kralzar Empire, Lyra's voice rang out, translated across multiple linguistic matrices. "Your greatest weapon is your greatest weakness. Adaptation is survival." The transmission included tactical data, communication logs, strategic vulnerabilities, a complete exposure of the Kralzar's most guarded military secrets. But it was more than information. It was an invitation, a challenge. When the Sovereign Talon limped back to Kralzar space, it carried more than just technical defeat. It carried a philosophical wound that would fester far longer than any physical damage. Commander Harper watched Lyra with a mixture of pride and caution. That, he said quietly, was not just a mission. That was a declaration of war. Lyra's genetic marker pulsed, not with aggression, with potential. In the vast darkness of space, something fundamental had changed. The disposable princess had become something else entirely, a weapon of mass transformation. The royal spire of the Kralzar homeworld trembled with King Vornak's unbridled fury. Holographic displays flickered with the remnants of the Sovereign Talon's transmission, a humiliation that cut deeper than any physical wound. "Explain," he demanded, his voice a weaponized growl that had made entire civilizations cower. Sub-Admiral Krasnak knelt, his multiple eyes unable to meet the king's gaze. The once proud military commander now looked like a broken instrument. The human weapon. Our daughter. She did not just defeat us. She exposed us. The transmission played again. Lyra's voice, no longer the meek, disposable princess, cut through the chamber like a quantum blade. Strategic vulnerabilities. Communication protocols. The very architecture of Kralzar military doctrine laid bare for all to see. Vornak's rage transcended sound. It was a physical force that made the crystalline walls of the royal spire vibrate. Lesser beings would have been crushed by the pure psychic weight of his anger. "Prepare the extinction fleet," he commanded. But this was no simple military response. This was a personal vendetta. Intelligence reports flooded in. Lyra was more than a traitor now. She had become a catalyst. Marginalized groups across conquered Kralzar territories were beginning to communicate, to organize. Her transmission had done more than expose military secrets. It had planted seeds of rebellion. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the developing situation from the horizon, her fingers dancing across quantum-encrypted interfaces. "He's going to overreact," she told Commander Harper. And that's exactly what Lyra wants. The Extinction Fleet was a monument to Kralzar military might. Thousands of biomechanical warships, each capable of sterilizing entire planetary systems. A weapon of absolute destruction, built on generations of unchallenged military supremacy. But Lyra had learned something the Kralzar had never understood. True power was never about destruction. It was about potential. As the fleet prepared to launch, something extraordinary began to happen. Communication networks that Lyra had subtly compromised during her first mission began to activate, not with weapons, but with information, with hope. Vornak received the first report of internal disruption during the fleet's final preparation. Maintenance crews on critical warships suddenly refusing orders. Communication officers sharing classified information. A cancer of consciousness spreading through the most rigid military structure in the known galaxy. "She is dismantling us," Krasnak whispered, a realization that bordered on religious revelation. Not with weapons, with ideas. The Extinction Fleet would launch, but it would not be the weapon Vornak intended. In the vast communication networks, in the quantum spaces between thought and action, Lyra was fighting a war far more profound than any physical battle. She was rewriting the very concept of power. Vornak looked at the holographic displays, seeing not just a military threat, but the complete unraveling of everything his civilization believed about strength, hierarchy, and control. His daughter, the one he had called worthless, was becoming the most dangerous weapon in galactic history. And she was just getting started. The rebellion began in whispers. Across 1,000 conquered worlds, the marginalized, those crushed beneath the Kralzar's militaristic heel, found their voice through a network more complex than any quantum communication system. Lyra had become more than a warrior. She was a living transmission, a beacon of possibility. On the mining colony of Zarix Prime, a maintenance worker named Krell decoded the first transmission. His hands, scared from generations of forced labor, trembled as he accessed the encrypted message. It wasn't a call to arms. It was something far more dangerous. A blueprint of liberation. Commander Harper watched the evolving situation with a mixture of pride and concern. "She's creating a living network," he told Dr. Rodriguez. "Not just communication, consciousness." The Horizon had become more than a research vessel. It was now the heart of a galactic liberation movement. Lyra's transmissions were works of art. Each message was a quantum puzzle, designed to bypass traditional communication barriers. To the Kralzar, they appeared as random noise. To the oppressed, they were instructions, hope, a map to freedom. On the agricultural world of Rentok, entire worker collectives began to synchronize their actions. A subtle sabotage that didn't destroy, it transformed. Machinery was reprogrammed. Supply lines were redirected. The Krulzar's perfect machine of oppression began to develop unexpected glitches. We are not weapons, one transmission read. We are potential. The genetic marker that had once marked Lyra as weak now pulsed with a frequency that seemed to resonate across entire planetary systems. Dr. Rodriguez's research suggested something unprecedented. Lyra was developing a form of quantum entanglement that defied current scientific understanding. Vornak's intelligence networks went mad trying to track the source. Every time they thought they had located the transmission point, it shifted. One moment originating from a distant mining colony, the next from a research station, then a transport vessel. But it wasn't about hiding. It was about being everywhere. On the industrial world of Meklar, an entire worker population simultaneously walked away from their stations, not in violent rebellion. In coordinated, peaceful resistance. They simply stopped. Machines ground to a halt. Production ceased. The Krulzar had no protocol for this. Sergeant Maya Chen watched the developing situation with a warrior's appreciation. She's not fighting their war, she told Harper. She's changing the entire concept of conflict. Each transmission carried more than information. It carried possibility, hope, the radical notion that strength wasn't about domination, but about collective potential. Vornak received reports that made no sense. Entire military outposts reporting strange synchronicities. Communication networks developing unexpected resilience. Conquered populations displaying unprecedented levels of coordinated resistance. This was not a rebellion. This was a revolution of consciousness. And Lyra, the princess once considered worthless, was its architect. The genetic marker pulsed, not with aggression, with something far more powerful. Potential. The final battlefield was not a place of metal and fire, but of consciousness. King Vornak's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, hung in space like a cathedral of destruction. Thousands of weapon systems primed. Entire civilizations' worth of military might concentrated into a single point of absolute power. And at its heart, a confrontation that would redefine the very concept of conflict. Lyra stood on the bridge of the horizon, her body no longer just biological. The genetic marker had transformed her into something unprecedented, a living quantum interface between potential and reality. You are watching, she transmitted, her voice cutting through every Krulzar communication network simultaneously, the moment your system of control dies. The confrontation was multilayered. Physical, psychological, quantum. Vornak's multiple eyes burned with a rage that had crushed civilizations. You are nothing, he roared, his voice a weapon designed to shatter resistance. A genetic mistake. A worthless princess I should have terminated at birth. But Lyra had learned something far more powerful than destruction. She had learned transformation. The horizon wasn't just a ship. It was a living weapon of potential. Every system responded to Lyra's consciousness, quantum algorithms dancing at the speed of thought. The ship moved not like a military vessel, but like a living organism, adaptive, responsive, impossible to predict. Watch, she told her father. Across 1,000 conquered worlds, the rebellious networks she had cultivated began to move, not with weapons, with possibility. Communication networks transformed. Supply lines redirected. Military systems began to report impossible synchronicities. Entire planetary populations moved with a collective consciousness that defied traditional understanding of resistance. Dr. Rodriguez and Commander Harper watched in awe. She's not just fighting, Harper murmured. She's rewriting the fundamental language of conflict. The Eternal Dominion's weapon systems began to fail, not through direct attack, but through a quantum-level disruption that made traditional warfare look like children's games. Each system was being transformed from within, its fundamental purpose reimagined. Vornak's rage became something else. Fear. What are you? He demanded. Lyra's response was both a transmission and a revelation. I am what happens when potential is no longer confined. When a system discovers that its greatest strength is not control, but adaptation. The final assault was not an attack. It was an invitation. Entire Kralzar military networks began to collapse, not through destruction, but through fundamental reimagining. Systems that had been built on absolute control suddenly discovered flexibility. Hierarchies dissolved. Potential emerged. Vornak watched his entire civilization's foundation crumble, not through violence, through consciousness. You are my greatest weapon, Lyra transmitted, and my greatest lesson. The genetic marker pulsed, a beacon of transformation. In that moment, the princess once considered worthless became the architect of a new galactic understanding. The galaxy looked different now. Not broken, not conquered, but reimagined. Lyra stood before the Galactic Reconstruction Council, no longer the disposable princess, no longer just a weapon. She was an architect of possibility. Behind her, representatives from 100 liberated civilizations, each with their own story of transformation, watched with a mixture of hope and cautious anticipation. We are not building a new empire, she began, her voice carrying the quantum resonance that had become her signature. We are creating a living system of potential. The horizon had become more than a ship. It was now the central hub of a new kind of galactic cooperation. Dr. Rodriguez's research had revealed that Lyra's genetic marker was more than an anomaly. It was a blueprint for evolutionary adaptation that could reshape entire civilizations. Commander Harper stood nearby, watching the proceedings with a veteran's understanding. The man who had first seen potential in a scared, discarded princess now witnessed the fruition of a radical experiment in consciousness. The remnants of the Kralzar civilization were not destroyed. They were being transformed. Entire military systems were being reproposed. Hierarchical structures dismantled and rebuilt on principles of collective potential. Vornak, now stripped of power, but not of life, served as a living testament to the power of transformation. Strength is not about domination, Lyra explained to the council. It's about the capacity to adapt, to grow, to reimagine. Each liberated world brought its unique perspective. The mining colonies of Zarix Prime, the agricultural worlds of Rentok, the industrial systems of Meklar. No longer conquered territories, but collaborative partners in a living, breathing galactic network. Sergeant Maya Chen had developed training programs that redefined military preparation, no longer about creating weapons, but about cultivating potential. Each recruit was seen as a complex system of possibility, not a tool of destruction. The genetic research that had begun with Lyra became a cornerstone of a new understanding of evolution. Dr. Rodriguez's papers suggested that what they had discovered was more than a biological anomaly. It was a blueprint for conscious adaptation. We are not ending a war, Lyra told the assembled representatives. We are beginning a conversation. Communication networks that had once been tools of oppression now became channels of collective growth. Every system, every civilization was learning to see beyond its previous limitations. The quantum entanglement that had been Lyra's unique gift was now becoming a galactic methodology. Vornak, brought before the council, was not a prisoner. He was a witness. The once mighty king now understood the true meaning of strength, not in conquest, but in the capacity to change. I thought I was creating a weapon, he said, his multiple eyes reflecting a newfound understanding. Instead, I created possibility. The genetic marker that had once marked Lyra as weak now pulsed with a frequency that seemed to resonate across entire star systems, a beacon of transformation. As the first session of the Galactic Reconstruction Council concluded, something fundamental had changed. This was not an end. This was a beginning. A living system of potential had been born, and it was just getting started.